So what is coming next? We are heading towards one of the highlights, the first highlights of this summit. We will have a conversation between two great experts on the topic of transformations, how to engage with all of them, question mark. Yeah, so this complexity is the topic. So it's my pleasure to introduce the two contributors. They will share their experiences and perspectives with us in a moment. So first of all, let's welcome on stage Steffen Erath. Hi, Steffen. So, Steffen Erath is the head of innovation and sustainability at the Hansgrohe Group. He has over 2 decades of experience in innovation leadership. He views sustainability not merely as compliance, but as an opportunity for transformation and growth. Under his direction, Hansgrohe's ambitious green vision aims to reduce energy and water consumption by up to 90% while delivering excellent user experiences. Next to his work at Hansgrohe, he's also an author, a lecturer, and a business angel, if I can say so, for, of course, innovative and transformative startups and solutions. So welcome once again, Steffen Erath.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Yeah, our second expert is Alexandra Deschamps-Sonsino, and I can already see her on the screen. So, hello, Alexandra. Great to have you here. Welcome also to you. So, Alexandra is an author, consultant, and design entrepreneur whose work bridges technology, ethics, and climate action. You are based in London, Alexandra. You founded the Low Carbon Design Institute, which was the first UK distributor of Arduino, and you authored Smarter Homes and Creating a Culture of Innovation. Your projects are featured in major design institutions such as the London Design Museum and the MoMA. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Steffen and Alex, thank you so much for joining us. We will do the following now. Steffen will kick off with a short impulse to get us into the mood of the topic. After this, Alex will also contribute a short impulse, and then afterwards we are ready to discuss also with you. So people connecting online, please put your questions or comments in the chat. And here in the audience, we will then collect also questions or comments from you. You just raise your hand, and we have some students, some people ready with a microphone. But now, over to you, Steffen.
All right, so let's talk about sustainability. So I'm 40 years old, 20 years with Hansgrohe, so the shower company, and I'm heading the departments of innovation and sustainability. And normally, if you look into these two fields of sustainability and innovation, you would say, how does this belong together? You know, sustainability has an image crisis right now. We are talking about green fatigue. So people are really kind of going back, but at the end of the day, I like this word in English a lot because it's the ability to sustain. The ability to sustain relevant, profitable, so it's the basis of every company. And how can you stay sustainable? So I brought a little presentation. Let's have a sneak peek in the presentation. And I want to convince you that sustainability is nothing other than the radical and consistent application of common sense. That's what it is about. So I brought you a little game. So that's two big companies, you know, probably Total Energies, if you're still driving, although they have some electric opportunities there as well. But it's one of the big 4 oil companies in the world based in France. And then you have Beyond Meat. Who knows Beyond Meat? So that's the patties without meat. You get it in McDonald's and so on. They struggle a lot. But now raise your hand. Who thinks which company is more sustainable? Total Energies? It's always some because they think it's too obvious to go for the other, and actually it is. The issue is, you know, we want to have easy truth. Here you see like an ESG rating made by a private Swiss bank, and you see all of the green ratings are with Total Energies, although they still invested 4 or 5 years ago, still 80% into fossil fuels. And then you have Beyond Meat, and they struggle a lot on the stock exchange, but the business model, it's deeply sustainable, but maybe they lack people who are filling out the questionnaires. Maybe they don't have a proper process for it. And this is why it's not so easy to tell you what is sustainable and what not. And the same belongs to sustainability in your business. A lot of people, especially we are trained in business how to stay profitable. We have the euros, we have the dollars, so we know to handle this. And now there is this sustainability, and everybody thinks now it's the carbon. The carbon is the thing, and we transfer the carbon into a price, and then we manage all of this, but it's not. Unfortunately, sustainability is a little bit more complex, so there's a lot of crisis, and it depends. That's the common sense. As a shower company, maybe it's rather the water. Maybe it's not the microplastics in the water. Maybe it's the water we consume. And this is what CSRD is all about. But if you talk about CSRD, you're into politics. It seems like a bureaucracy. But at the end of the day, it's just where is the biggest lever for yourself. And this is very important when we talk about innovation. Sometimes I have now the pleasure to take some and to give some lectures across the lake at the University of St. Gallen. And St. Gallen is known to be very, very focused on economics. But meanwhile, we don't have the Adam Smith diagram with supply and demand defined by price. They even teach here, Kate Rayworth, donut economics. So we have to innovate and we have to kind of produce and to manage our company in the donut. So there is an ecological ceiling where we overshoot, and there is a social foundation, and it depends in which situation you are, in which country you live. And we have to get in there. And if we are not in this donut, this is a problem. But problem is good for innovators. Innovators love nothing more than problems. And I think, after 20 years of design thinking, we started here, at least in the global north, to design problems in order we can solve them. And on the other hand, you have these 17 SDGs where the world agrees that this is the big targets we have to achieve in order to have a just and fair world. So you can look into the 169 sub-goals. Everybody will find some opportunities. Either you are a startup or you're an existing company. Why don't you solve the big problem and then make business out of it? So you can do business and you can do good. And that's the idea, actually, of the sustainable innovation sweet spot. It's not so complicated. Every company should try to get into the three circles. So profit, we are very good. Planet and people, we have to manage. But what happens? I do some advisory in other companies, and what I often find at the end of the day, it's like the mock mouse effect. So we all concentrate on profit, and then at the end of the project, we realize, we want it to be sustainable, so let's do something in the global south and green packaging, and let's call it sustainability. And that's the basis of the kind of greenwashing dynamism which started 5, 6, 7 years ago. But it could be so easy, and that's what planet-centered innovation is all about. So it's a shift in the mindset. So don't start with profitability, start with the planetary, with the societal challenges. Innovate in a way that you solve these problems, and then the next checkbox is that it has to resonate with the people, because we do this planet-centered innovation in order, to help humanity, to help people, to help the buyers and the users. If they don't accept the solution, you go back, you try another thing until people like it. And actually the last step, it's you have to make it scalable. It has to be profitable. And believe me, if you're working in a company, you can't do a lot of projects without being profitable. The charity budgets are very, low. So at the end of the day, we could even use planet-centered innovation in a kind of a complexity filters. So far, when we talk about sustainability, every manager says, I have so many stuff to do, and now I have to add sustainability on top. What if we take this at the starting point of every project? And then at the end of the day, let's only solve the one or two big problems in such a way that people like it, that you can make business with it. This would be, the fastest way to transform the complete economy towards sustainability. But let's be clear, sustainability, it's not enough anymore. We overcame already all of the borders, so we have to think of regenerative. So that's even the next step. The decoupling is really happening. And this is something, you see as well when you look into biomimicry. So you can look all of this, what we are doing in business, and you can look into nature, and nature already solved it for us. So this is as well, it's some studies from the 80s and 90s. It's called the EKS-Spirale. I don't know if you know Wolfgang Neves. So the idea was you look into plants and you see why they don't grow anymore. So they are lacking some minerals. And that's the bottleneck. If you solve the bottleneck, the plant is growing. That's the same with businesses. Every business wants to have profitable or sustainable growth. It says in every strategy foil, that's the goal. And then the managers, if they don't achieve these goals, they do kind of root cause. And they think, okay, oh, we have too high costs, we need lower costs, let's go to Eastern Europe or to Asia. But that's not the root cause. That's financial engineering. So you have to go back to the real root, to the radical innovation. Radical comes from radic, so that's the root. Is this still the relevant problem we are solving? And sometimes this is shifting after 30, 40 years. The problems 40 years ago might be solved. We don't need more cars. Maybe there's other topics to be solved. And this is how planet-centered innovation works. And this is how Hansgrohe created a business worth 1.5 billion. Hansgrohe, 1901, saw the lack of physical hygiene. That's how he created the business, from 0 Reichsmark to 70 million D-Mark. This is what Hansgrohe did. Then there comes Klaus Grohe, the son of Hans. So he saw everywhere, at least in Germany, in Europe, we had our bathrooms, but they looked really like clean, white tiles, really functional. What's the big desire of the people, the big problem? It was mental hygiene. And he solved it with the force of design. So we brought the world-renowned designers like Jean-Marie Massot, like Philippe Starck, like Frog Design, who later designed the Apple, into the bathroom. And by solving this problem of mental hygiene, he created a business worth 1 billion. But he already saw, he's now turning 87, what's the next challenge? We are running out of water. So sometimes you have to shift, your focus as a business leader. Now Hans-Jürgen, my boss, he's the CEO of this company. Now we have a new field to innovate. Of course, we are still producing showers to get physically clean. Of course, we are still producing showers which look nice to be mentally clean. But now we can innovate in the field of water. So you can grow in the donut. There's always this discussion about green growth and degrowth. I think degrowth is too far away for a lot of people. So let's first start to talk about green growth. And later, of course, this won't last forever, but it's too much for a lot of people. And that's actually the idea. And I just want to show you one example in real life how this looks like. That's our 3 big topics. So we are running out of water. Even here, in this area, in the last 20 years, we lost groundwater in the amount of the Lake of Constance. That's the pee of the dinosaurs. It's meant to be there for generations. We used it for producing batteries. We use it, to shower. We don't need drinking water to shower. It's insane. So we have to really tackle this issue, even in Germany. So I was at the World Water Conference at the United Nations in New York. They expect in 2030 there is 40% more demand than water. So that's a water crisis. Nobody's talking about it. Then we have carbon emissions. Still in the shower, taking a shower for 1 minute with 40 degrees consumes the same amount of energy than driving a Tesla on a German Autobahn. So saving water saves energy, saves carbon, saves money, so easy one. And last but not least, we are running out of resources. So we get all of the minerals and everything from across the globe, but we are running out of resources. We have to become part of the circular economy. So that's a planetary thing. Then we have this, why do people shower? Mental hygiene, not to feel lonesome. So sometimes you overcompensate the feeling of loneliness through hot showers. So there's a psychological thing behind taking a showers, which goes far beyond of getting clean. And in the way we innovate right now, we shouldn't get rid of these needs. It's like, if you innovate the cars and you go back to horses, it won't happen. So once the people are used to be very mobile, you have to innovate on top of this. So this is the second box. And the last, what we did, we don't talk about all the crises there. In order to motivate a company, the people, the customers, you have to create a vision. And we created a bathroom which was designed in a way that it resonates. It's not about, a competition of who has the better crisis. It's rather, let's agree that this bathroom looks nice, and our target was to reduce water, energy, and carbon by 90%. And I have a 2-minute video how the future could look like. That's the green vision beyond water.
A bathroom in harmony with nature and humanity. A retreat that pampers us, that washes stress and dirt from our bodies. In the morning, before a long day, and in the evening for a relaxing night. All this happens almost without water. It is a warm space, created by design instead of energy. A look in the mirror is easy for us because we know that our well-being comes not at the expense of the environment. In the future, our hands are washed clean with only a little water. In the future, we will fulfill our desire for relaxation and the need for a mental retreat with heat, steam, and color instead of bathtubs full of water. This is the future. 90% less water, 90% less energy, 90% less CO2. This is Hansgrohe's Green Vision Beyond Water.
So that's what we created, and maybe it resonates with you. You know it from The Little Prince. You know, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men and women together wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And that's exactly what sustainability is about. With the power of design, with positive images, the future is active. You can create a future. And we shouldn't talk too much about crisis, rather about opportunities. And this is exactly why I created this planet-centered innovation approach. So who wants to know more about it? There is a book, unfortunately only in German. And with that said, I hand over now to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steffen. And I think straight over to Alex. So from Zeppelin University to London. I guess there's also a water crisis. Or how's the weather today?
It's horrible because it's autumn and it's London. So absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Please tell me if this does not work. Otherwise, I will carry on.
Yeah, it's working perfectly. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to bounce us into a slightly different place to where Steffen has kind of left us with Le Petit Prince, which I really appreciate. And just ask some simple questions, I suppose. Thank you for the introduction earlier. My background is really one where I've explored both design and technology, but also climate in the last few years. I'm currently at the Energy Systems Catapult, which is in London. And just to give us a sense of where I am, I'm 58 hours cycle away from you that are in the room. So I'm delighted I don't have to do those 58 hours, but I appreciate also that things, while being delivered online, can feel a bit not situated. And I think the crux of my talk is to situate things. I'm in England, I'm in the UK. Obviously, we have had a recent history of leaving behind the European project, but I think that I'll speak to that as well as someone who has lived in the UK for 20 years, but I'm not English, as you might have gathered from my accent. And I want to pick up, I think, first on transformation. The definition of transformation is to change completely the appearance or character of something or someone, especially so that this thing or person is improved. And I think that we have to go back to this definition because it invites two thoughts for me and two questions for us as people in the humanities, in design, in economics, across every chapter and slice of society. One which is change completely over what period of time? When do we expect this transformation to start, to finish, and improved according to whom? I think improve is in the eye of the beholder somewhat. So we have two dimensions that I think we don't quite ever control really. We are perhaps with every project either in the beginning, middle of, and end of a transformation project, but we also are never quite sure perhaps whether that project is living up to its expectations or up to its potential. And I think that speaks to two things, one which is the speed of transformation, and the other one which is the unintended consequences. The introduction alluded to some of this, so this will feel familiar, I hope, but I'm going to anchor it very strongly in the culture and the place that I'm in now. And if we sort of look at the speed, I think some of us will immediately think of the shearing layers, which was designed by Frank Duffy in the 1960s as a way of talking about architecture, but also taken then forward by Stuart Brand in his pacing layers. And this is a mechanism or a way or framework of thinking about time and thinking about how things move and how things are in fact transformed. And I think that what we have is a culture today that really is in love with worrying about fashion. And in the context of Stuart Brand, he also talked about it as art, and very closely inclined and intertwined with commerce. But I think there are these different layers that have different speeds and are affected very differently. If we look at nature, I thought I would give you my own building. This is, I'm in the middle apartment. So I live in an apartment in South London. And if you go to Google Maps, you can see the two lime trees that have been planted some time ago in front of my flat. And, you know, it's incredible to me that I can sort of watch these lime trees grow, of course, because they're right outside my window. But the internet is also sort of watching them grow. What is tragic about this is that, of course, Google Maps didn't exist prior to 2008. And so there's a sort of limit and a natural limit to what we can tell about the nature that's in front of us. My recollection, my personal recollection will be better eventually still to that of the computers that have been going in front of my house and taking pictures for Google every year. Will that story of how big those lime trees are, how big they become, are they eventually cut down? That's all in the future. But that deep past of the plant doesn't exist right now, according to computers. And I think of that as really interesting. So that's the kind of nature layer. The culture layer is also really interesting to me. I live in England. Many of you will have probably gone to London at some point for maybe a weekend away. Maybe you've lived here for a while. I also grew up in Paris. And so these are two, you know, places in the world where culture holds a very particular place, and culture is also moving. And so very recently, the British Museum held a banquet as a fundraiser right in front of the Parthenon marbles. And the Greek government was really critical of this activity because it sort of puts the marbles at risk by putting it in a very dense and high-risk event. While at the same time, just last month, of course, we had the theft of the Louvre. And in that particular gallery, only 1 in 3 of the galleries had CCTV. So we're always sort of playing around, I guess, with how close we link culture to technology, how closely we link culture to other more fundamental areas, like government. I post this, I think, because it's always one of the most interesting places for me to look in my life, where I think of conflict and I think of wars. Out of the most active wars right now, according to the Wikipedia page that tracks ongoing conflicts, out of the 8, 3 of those were started before the year 2000. You should have a look at which. They will not surprise you. But I think so much of those deep layers that are moving constantly and those areas of conflict are with us for decades. And so our professional transformations may be quite quick, but some transformations are very slow, very painful, and very long. I'll move us on a little bit just for time. But this is a reservoir in the middle of England, and this is what it looks like. This is a water reservoir, and this is in June this year. Now, there's a lot of rain in the last few weeks here in England, but in general, our reservoirs are down. And so suddenly, this little bridge that you can see in the front was exposed for the very first time. Nobody knew that bridge was there. And this was called a packing horse bridge because these used to be bridges where horses and carriages that were packed full would be able to go. And so the infrastructure around us is also still there, still in deep time, and climate change is exposing our deep history of infrastructure and our deep infrastructural past. And I think once we get kind of closer to commerce, we get closer to layers which are really always attempting to think in deep time, but doesn't necessarily always pan out. Panasonic, when it was started by a 37-year-old, he tried to think in terms of 250 years. This is not my drawing. I don't want you to judge me on the basis of this drawing. This is their drawing of his plan for the first 250 years of the organization, where there would be cycles of 25 years, and those cycles would go between construction growth and social contributions. I think we can make it our own judgments as to whether this has worked out or not. And again, another example is Olivetti. Those of you who are design geeks might know them as the makers of some extraordinary design icons. And I think today they are still there somehow, but absolutely not what they used to be. So that speed and that pace and those layers are constantly moving. And then that speed of transformation at those different layers has unintended consequences. And I'm going to go through this very quickly, but through the lens of something quite old, which is the India Report. The India Report was written in 1957 by Ray and Charles Eames, who spent 3 months in India and helped the government think about how it might invest in a design and innovation function and a department. And they asked the government to consider the history, the weather, the local resources, and the state of education. And I'm not sure we ask ourselves those questions today when we think of major projects, when we think of major investments. So in the UK right now, I think that we can easily say that we have failed on very many of those projects. I think we have attrition and loss in a great number of dimensions. And that plan and that project to think more strategically in those questions, I think hasn't really worked out. But I'll leave us with something positive, I think, which is that what makes news doesn't make necessarily change. And I recommend The Pursuit of Loneliness in case you haven't looked at that. And I think that we have to think of news as being a snapshot of what's going on. That doesn't necessarily give us the tools. And I think part of the tools, whether that's in ideas that are there that still hadn't really worked out. This is an example or a series of examples of energy saving solutions that existed 20 years ago in the UK that have never really panned out. they're still valid. They're still there to inspire us. They're still there to push us forward as designers, to ask ourselves the question, why aren't these solutions there with us today? And we have tools. And Steffen showed some of those tools. I think those tools are there. They're always anchored in time. They're always anchored in our potential to change and to make that change work. And I think they're there for us to kind of take forward. And so I'll just leave us with 3 questions, I think, for our conversation, which is, how do we consider time as part of our personal and professional transformation work? How do we keep an eye on history? And how do we keep going, and with who, when the pendulum swings? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Alexandra, for your inspiring talk, and also to you, Steffen. So I think we all sensed how these 2 different contributions somehow combine and complement each other. So Steffen, what particularly resonated with you? I hand over back to you.
Well, a lot. So I have my focus on business. So I have the belief that the biggest transformation driver in our times is through business. So of course you could argue if this is good or bad, but as you just laid out, it's a matter of time, and we are running out of time. So if we try to transform a lot of areas without economy, it's going to be difficult, I think, or maybe too late. So this is why I think there is no other choice than trying to stimulate economy to be part of this transformation. And I think we shouldn't do it through a moral compass, because then it resonates only with 20% of the consumers and business owners and so on. So we need the broad mass. So we need something which is where the majority of people agrees on. And I think, it's very basic then. It's, sustainability, all the transformation, they have to pay off. The highest appreciation of value in our society is if you pay something for it. It is what it is. So I think that's one of the biggest chances from an economical point of view.
Thank you, thank you. The audience, get ready.
Alex,
yeah,
Alex, you
sure.
might. I saw you were. Maybe you want to respond.
Yeah.
For sure.
What is your thoughts on? The biggest driver is maybe business. You brought in this important topic of time, and time is running out. What is your take on it, or what resonates? I know that you have been also being involved in innovative and cultural transformation projects, where also time plays an important role. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to disagree very slightly with Steffen, just in the sense that I think that corporations are not the only economic actor. And I think if we have populations, like I alluded to in my talk, if we have populations that are not well, then they don't start businesses. They don't join businesses. They don't thrive in businesses. And so I think we do have to remember that there has to be a role for the state, and a role for even corporations as social actors, whether that's through corporate social responsibility budgets, through actually involving themselves in society and not just acting in complete isolation to society. I think that's always the tension. I studied, and the reason why I showed the Olivetti example is I studied in Ivrea, which used to be the home of Olivetti, which is in the Piemonte region of Italy. And that area was employed, over 90% of the area was employed by Olivetti. And so when they closed down most of their manufacturing in northern Italy, the entire region was basically out of work. And so without any other forms of support by the local government, you can't necessarily always completely rely on corporations to save us, as it were.
And I think this also resonates with a question from the chat I would like to bring in, and also to the audience here. If you have a question for the both of them or one, please put your hands up so we can see you, and then bring the microphone. There's a student, Martina's, asking question, I think, for Steffen, but it's connected to, I think, what also Alex said. This sometimes seems nearly impossible. How can we be realistically persuade major global powers, no? Such as maybe China, United States, to prioritize environmental sustainability when they are among the world's largest polluters?
Yes. There is maybe some prejudice about China and Asia. So I think if you look into how they are evolving with the electrification and so on, they are probably doing a better job than some of the Western countries. Maybe there is a different idea behind it. So I believe in Europe, when you look now into the three areas, I believe our innovation USP is quality, and quality is closely linked to sustainability. So this is why I would play out this as a competitive advantage, so to say. I don't think that we will be the continent with the mass production or AI leaders. So this is my take on it, and I'm an optimist. You know, if we go too pessimistic into this, then we stand still and nothing happens. So I really believe that we need now some optimism, some best examples, some companies, and there's good examples like close to here VD with Antje von Dewitz and so on. So give them some attention that it's possible even with the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, you can make some money and business is working and maybe others follow. So I'm totally with you. It's not only corporations and capitalism, but I think without them, that's going to be a tough one. You know, if you have these guys against you,
give them the more attention, the resources to get something done. I mean, the discussion reminds me, I want to highlight it, we had a Transcultural Leadership Summit 2023 on sustainability, where we did a world tour. We had some of these discussions from India and China. Also, the topic of water came up. So it's for us also beautiful to see how these topics evolve. Alex, I saw you wanted to respond here also or comment, and then I'm happy to take a question also from the audience here. Alex.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think that it's important to, this is a very old expression, but as a Gen Xer, I think it's really shaped my life, which is think global, act local. So no matter what's happening elsewhere, let's also keep an eye on what we're actually able to do locally. I think people lose hope so easily if they don't see in their everyday life, in their everyday environment, in their everyday community, some forms of change. And of course, that will differ from one area to the next. But if you really believe in the environmental project, doing something locally first to change the nature and the physical nature of your entire environment so that others who are in your community can get behind it as well, is the beginning of change, no matter at what scale. And I think that helps us keep a hold of the anxiety, because pointing to other countries, pointing to other regions and saying, but it's so much worse over there, why aren't they doing things, is in a way absolving ourselves from the responsibility to act locally. And I think it's really important to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, in the chat, there are much more questions coming in also about the role of the elites on these topics. I wanted to ask, is there in the audience, because it's hard for us to see, is there a question? Yeah, over there. I hand over to our colleague, Jessica.
Hi, so thank you very much. We have a question to Steffen. And I think that sustainability and the challenge related to sustainability are challenges that relate to all social and economic classes. But then when I think about, for example, high quality food that are also sustainable, or sustainable clothes, and all these kind of things, they are quite expensive. And after watching also your video about this new type of toilet or bathroom that sounds quite interesting and sustainable, but at the same time it seems to be also expensive, so to say. So the question would be how to be sure that in these sustainable challenges we will have on board all social, cultural and economic classes.
Yeah, absolutely right. You know, we live in a society with a lot of noise. So it's difficult to get heard. We are in the interior design business. So in order to get attention, you have to stand out. So you have to be loud. And this is a picture to be loud. People stay there and say, what's that? You know, sometimes you have to even polarize in a way. But later, if you really take it seriously, it doesn't, you know, the green luxury segment doesn't solve the problem. You have to democratize it. So we are having, you know, showers for 40 euros. Everybody can buy tomorrow with the sustainable material, and you save the same amount of energy and water, but it's just a little shower. So if I would present a little shower, everybody would say, okay, yes, I know this. So sometimes this is the challenge in our world, where you get the most attention in times of TikTok. So the 3 seconds, what's crazy. So we use the power of design to get this attention, but later, if you really take it serious, we have as well projects in the Global South, where we work with Social Innovation Academy in Uganda and Kenya. It's a totally different approach. You know, it's a kind of, we wanted to design, and that's a question if it's possible, bathing culture. Normally, bathing culture develops over years, hundreds of years, but we can't wait hundreds of years, so we try to manipulate it in a way, in a positive sense. So, but you're completely right, just, you know, selling 10 or 100 of these bathrooms doesn't work. And the mindset behind as well is from competitive advantage to collaborative advantage. So if you are one of the market leaders and you claim that this is the future of bathrooms with 90% less water, energy, and so on, competitors follow, suppliers see this, customers like it. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you can steer a little bit the narrative in this direction. So that was the idea behind.
So yeah, thank you for the answer and also for the good question. There was another question in the audience. Over there.
Alex, you wanted to comment or add, because it's always great to have, you know, the different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think that we have to be able to make some sacrifices if we want change to happen. And yes, things will be more expensive. And I think that's a sacrifice that we have, especially if we are able to, not everyone is, but if we are able to, that market-making space cannot exist if we are not ready to invest a little more. And I think that we are extremely privileged in Western Europe. We're extremely privileged in North America. There are areas where we can demand, you know, Temu-type pricing. But actually, if we want to vote with our dollars, again, an old expression from the 80s and 90s, I think that's what helps new markets, and that's what helps eventually get costs down, because more of us are ready to make that investment. And I think it helps then other people make that investment, because it's not a luxury. I think some things can become more mundane, but there has to be a lot of us that decide to make that move. If everything feels too expensive in relation to, you know, stuff that really shouldn't be in the market and that is dirt cheap, well, let's get the dirt cheap stuff out of the market by not buying those solutions, because we know that they're not well made. It's planned obsolescence, the quality of the products is terrible, and the workers are probably not treated right. So I think we have to make those decisions and make more ethical purchasing decisions if we can afford it, because it helps everybody else.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I hand over to you. Maybe you can also specify if your question goes first to Alex or to Steffen, and then we can include both of them. Over to you.
Probably both kind of can answer, but like when you see all these presentations and the ideas, sometimes I feel we should keep in mind that when you go to a different culture, and especially the cultures where a lot of people are living, they are probably a big factor in driving how the global market is working and how it's thinking. And I think sometimes these solutions we think of, they don't really fit within their culture and how they live. And my question was if there's any way, or how we especially should consider how different cultures are completely differently thinking about how the market is working, and they can probably even closely afford some of the solutions we think of. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Alexandra would start this time. Yeah, over to you, and then Steffen, you carry on.
You're unmuted. 1 second.
There's not a corporation in the world that doesn't have a local department that is specifically designing for a local market. So that sort of regionalization, I think, and Steffen can speak to that more than I can, but he's alluded to some of the projects in Africa. I don't think that that's necessarily always the answer, because the answer to our problems is also our problems have become other people's problems. So our over purchasing of fashion and poorly made fashion items create pollution for other people. And so I don't think it's always necessarily about creating solutions that fit every market, but it's also recognizing our impact on other markets. So I think it's not only, for me, it's not only about regionalizing solutions. It's actually recognizing and taking on taking responsibility for our impact on other people's markets and other people's, the pollution we create for others.
Yes, I think there were times, economy of scales, you created centrally and then you distributed globally, and this was a kind of colonialization with products, and these times are over. So we have different innovation clusters, so we have in Shanghai, in Europe, in the States, and as well in the Global South, and we're working together, and it's not like we are teaching them how to do it, it's really closely linked together. You learn from each other. But sometimes you don't have like the capabilities of producing like a special material, so you connect. But at the end of the day, I believe that you have more and more local innovation clusters, and you have to, as you said before, create local innovations which scale locally, but still fit all together in a global brand. But this is really difficult. We started producing in Germany and we distribute in 140 countries around the world. But it's getting more and more difficult because you have different cultures, you have different regulation, and a topic we didn't talk about yet at all is politics. So far, you always said from a business point of view, leave us alone, but I think we need just and fair rules. And politics can help you to make it a little bit fairer and juster. So I'm really an advocate to have some policies, manageable policies, but this helps you to have a fair game in these regions. But sometimes it means that they keep you out of their country, and that's the new reality. And sometimes you have to push back, and you only are in 100 countries, 80 countries, 60 countries. Could be that the opportunity shrinks in the future.
Yeah, thank you to the two of you. And I mean, one thing that is becoming obvious as we listen to you is the complexity of the matter. There are no simple answers. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions. So the complexity is there. And this is what we are all facing. And this is also what our students and our present and future leaders are actually facing. So I have a final question to the two of you. I ask you for a brief answer. What is your advice for our younger generations? How to tackle that? How to get on this positive spirit also when facing all of those transformations? Yeah, so that's my final question. Maybe we start with Alex and then Steffen. So a brief answer from Alex, please.
The briefest of answers. I think my recommendation is always that this is not a solo job. This is not something that you do on your own. This is something that you do with others. And the biggest soft skill that you can develop in your career is to work well with others and to understand who needs to be brought on site, who needs to be the person that you need to change their minds, you need to become friends with them, you need to get them on your project, you need them to get them to invest in your project. Those are the skills that I know you've been taught, of course, as part of your program, but I think they are the critical ones. Technical skills will come and go. They will age extremely quickly. The ability to do great AI prompting will last you about 5 minutes in the real world, where really it's about how do you convince someone to change their mind? And that is because you create a relationship with them they believe in your project, they believe in you, they want to work with you, they like you, and then you can do business together, or you can build a nonprofit together, or you can start a project together. I think that's what I would always recommend first.
Wow, and we must say we didn't brief her. Yes, she was actually talking about what transcultural leadership is all about. Thank you so much for your answer. This is great to hear that from you. And over to you, Steffen.
Yeah, I take an opportunistic view. So the bigger the change, the bigger the opportunity. So there has been never a better chance to start up something new, especially with the power of AI. You don't need a lot of money, you don't need a lot of knowledge and experience. You can change the world by creating your own startup. And I think that's the quickest way to drive change from my point of view.
Thank you very much. And a round of applause to our two experts.